favor? Motion passes. Mark?
The first item on the agenda is the revised investigation report for Collier Engineering that was issued on January 24th. And the last, I guess it was 2 meetings, when we first had this agenda item, there were several motions to revisit the report and to get responses for the recommendations in the report, and we have received those, and they're available on your workbook on the responses. I should have on page 16. And so I will just wait and have your questions and see how the best we can handle them.
Questions?
I do. Some are questions, some are comments. First, I guess I would say that I've expressed in at least 2 of our last 3 or 4 meetings that I feel like the investigation reports are don't make sense in that they state a preponderance of evidence standard, and then there's some findings that seem to apply a higher standard that demands more evidence. And there have been findings, and there's findings in reports we're looking at today that I feel confident if I went 2 floors up in a courtroom where the same preponderance of evidence standard applies, that I could get a judgment all day long on some of the evidence on these findings. And I'm not seeking to get into the business of any particular department or MNPS, but I have a real problem as an audit committee member in some of these findings that states preponderance of evidence standard, lays out evidence that seems to clearly indicate there's a violation, and then finds unsubstantiated. And this report has a few examples like that that I am going to mention. The finding, the second finding in A, which is on page 7 of the revised report, it talks about the allegation that there was actual preferential treatment given as a result of entertainment, where the finding is unsubstantiated. Based on the evidence and discussion that is in the report, it would be my judgment that the preponderance of evidence is that it is substantiated. In short, and I won't repeat the pages of documentation here, but there's violation of Metro ethical rules, a dramatic increase of the value of contracts, questionable billing that we're having to rely on the media to tell us about, while personnel is embedded in the department. And again, I think if I took that in front of another finder of fact on the same standard, you could lay out exactly the same information and find that there was a preponderance that it was substantiated. Similarly, the next finding about the discussion about whether sidewalk-only contracts are outside the scope. In pages 14 and 15, when it goes through legal analysis about what the contract says, I can't conceive of a way where sidewalk-only projects are in the scope of the contract. In particular, on page 14, when it goes through the contract language, it's clear that only quote-unquote associated sidewalk repairs are within the scope. And the only way to have the word associated make any sense whatsoever is if it's associated with a paving or road project. And with that, like, all this is laid out and then reaches the opposite conclusion of what my judgment would be, that the only way the contract makes sense is if it's sidewalk work associated with roadway work. Similarly, on the allegation C, which is discussed on page 17 of the report, where it talks about all the billing being just so and okay and therefore unsubstantiated. I mean, you just got to read the Tennessean this morning and reach a different conclusion. It seems like the analysis is superficial. Finally, on allegation H, this is one where the emergent allegation, and we asked for a timeline to be added, and the timeline makes 100% clear that audit figured out that there was a problem. Then it was brought to Public Works' attention. Then it was fixed before the report came out, and somehow that equals unsubstantiated. To my way of looking at it, if the only reason anybody did anything about it was because internal audit found the problem and brought it to the attention, then that's got to be substantiated all day long. So with these findings, I've got the common thread between it was B, where there was a legal analysis, and then the other three where it was a factual analysis, is I see all the facts, and applying the preponderance evidence standard, I would reach the opposite result. This has real-world impact in the Public Works management response, which is on after page 24. They specifically reject an audit finding, A1. They specifically reject it because the way they describe it, there's been a finding that there is no actual preferential treatment. And my view would be we certainly need to, as an audit committee, address the fact that the report is coming up with unsubstantiated when it seems clear the preponderance of the evidence would find for substantiation. And I would submit to Public Works that if they want to hang their hat on a questionable audit finding that there's no actual preferential treatment and ignore the horrible appearance that this creates, they do that at the peril of the city government. And frankly, the credibility of this committee and the credibility of the internal audit function. I am happy, I'm prepared to either make a motion to simply not accept this report because I don't think it's acceptable work product, or to make individual motions on the four findings that I've mentioned. And then my suggestion would be at this point, because I know we've got a further discussion coming later on in the agenda from Council Lady Tanika Vercher requesting other work related that touches on the public works world. I think the appropriate thing to do if we're going to entertain that work would be to think about whether we want to have a third-party full compliance audit of the Public Works Department. And I also know that overlaps with the separate independent investigation that the mayor's office has felt compelled to initiate due to the, frankly, slow work product from this committee. So just to get the conversation going, I'll make a motion to not accept this report as inadequate. And if we want to go in a different direction, I'm happy to be outvoted, but that's my motion.
Is there a second? Let me second that motion. Okay. Discussion?
I'd like to just hear from Mr. Swan.
Okay, well,
I just want to make sure you have an opportunity to respond.
well, and our position is, first, there's a lot of, let me put it this way, in the ACFE standards and award, there's a lot about not even having any conclusions. We've never, just because we're saying it's unsubstantiated doesn't mean it didn't happen. And that, just as you drawing your own conclusions, our staff within ourselves didn't believe that. Our understanding from preponderance of evidence is that the reasonable person would believe that it more likely happened than it did not. And everybody in our staff, based on interviewing with individuals, seeing their body language and talking to them, and believed that it didn't meet that preponderance of evidence. That there, the other part is, was there a fraud committed? These are the allegations. Is there a fraud or potential fraud or abuse? I shouldn't use the word fraud, but misrepresentation. And so that was our staff's conclusion. Now, I'll be happy to entertain a motion to say, we'll take out all conclusions. But I've always thought that was part of our job to give our opinion on what we have. But I've got half my staff telling me and other people telling me we shouldn't be putting them in there in the first place. We just list the facts and let you draw your own conclusion.
Where's the other people?
The other people?
You said your staff and other
Staff, well, there's people in the ACF community. If I go out and all the people that are CFEs and ACFEs, I can talk to just as many that will say you need to draw a conclusion, and then just as many says the standard says you should not have an opinion. And so you just list the facts and you don't do anything. So, all I'm getting is problems by trying to at least put our opinion out there.
That would lead me to believe you'd never have a finding.
Well, we'd have recommendations, but there wouldn't be a finding. We'd just lay the fact. An investigation is not an audit. It's just, here are the facts, this is what we observed, and we list them, and then each individual draws their own conclusion.
To what extent do you follow up on these facts? When you say, because you mentioned something about when you spoke to people and they spoke body language.
The investigators were the ones out doing the day-to-day and making those overall judgments from there. They're living and breathing this investigation for 3 or 4 months. And so, and I can tell you, I've been in investigations when you feel and you know there's something wrong and you make that conclusion. So, this case, they didn't have enough, they did not believe, and our office did not believe there was enough there to say that there's something, when you look at the emails, there was nothing in the emails that indicated anything. If we'd have gone and looked and there was no capital, increase in capital projects and this went up, there'd be no explanation for increasing the amount. We looked at the purchase orders released. Prior to the entertainment, they had saturated the $20 million. So there was a need to increase the value. These are indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts. Doesn't mean they'll ever have a dime. And it used to be we didn't even put a contract value on them. When I first came here, there was no contract values on indefinite delivery contracts, and you were controlled by the budget. And in this case, the budget would have been there, and they would have been able to do whatever they wanted. Now, the other issue on sidewalks, I can say, I'm hanging my hat on related services, and that the RFQ was very specific, saying delivery was engineering and construction of sidewalks, and the RFQ to demonstrate that was there. I agree that the top might say, I'm going to say that that's my time, right?
I just,
I'm just saying, the order should be the contract, but the RFQ is incorporated as part of it. And if it's conflicting, that's maybe I need to get a legal opinion from the law department to say, but I'm going to say that two purchasing agents, Jeff Gossage and Michelle, both agreed that it was in scope. The Director of Public Works believed it was in scope. They wouldn't have been requesting it. So far, you're the only person I've talked to who doesn't believe that it meets the scope of the contract.
Show of hands, outside scope. There's at least one of it.
But I'm just saying, the other part is when you're looking at these in the scope, when they build the same project categories and code. They didn't create a new pricing schedule to invoice for the sidewalk work. So they would. And so to me, it might have been for more specific and said related services for the paving office. They would have been better off to say for the Public Works Department. But my conclusion is that, that's how I look at it. That's how I've been taught. That's the practice at Metro, that you start working your way down through that order. The RFQ, the proposal, respondent to proposal, and they're all incorporated at the body of the contract, saying the whole contract is all these documents. So to me, the intent was to have them have the potential to be doing sidewalks, or they wouldn't have been asking about sidewalks in the RFQ. They wouldn't have said, tell us about your experience. Tell us where you've done this before. What are your qualifications for doing sidewalks? To me, those. Is it their primary job? No, but I don't say it's excluded. That's the rationale how I look at it. I will say I did not go and get the law department because that's the way it's always been, and we placed a lot of reliance that the purchasing agents who are responsible for making those determinations of scope of work, they approved the purchase orders. So but I'm happy to, we can lay facts out and not give opinions.
just want to make sure, Councilman Cooper.
And I'm happy to revise this report and take all the opinions out.
Stepping back from this, the press seems like it's been ahead of the story, ahead of us, ahead of the audit department. Today's newspaper, it would be inconceivable that you could have that article today and approve a benign audit on this space, because public trust does require more than this report at this, with the questions that are raised, particularly around billing, right? Particularly around billing. And if we're in a process where we're putting our head in the sand, and in the audit process, we're not looking at kind of other things. We're not trying a legal case here. We are trying to get fair value for the taxpayer. And to pick our head up and say, whoa, here are some questions about fair value to the taxpayer that should be answered. And again, it seems like you've got this artificially high standard on whether, in a courtroom, et cetera, where it's not that hard, that it is, and this comes in the performance aspect of the audit department, of somebody to look at their head and go, whoa, are you seeing what they are billing? Whoa, 3,000 hours? Wow. I mean, that's more than the busiest Wall Street lawyer bills. There are only a handful that bill 3,000 hours in a year. Whoa, this makes no sense. Whoa, hands up, let's go report on this. And that's just something we should be doing. And I think Bob raised a number of specific questions on this, but you can't close this case today with this number of questions that are out there. And
all due respect, I beg to differ. But go ahead. I apologize, Councilman.
This is an audit meeting, and we're responsive to the chairman here. So I've seconded Bob's motion that it not be accepted, and I think any reader of the newspaper would understand that you can't.
And you stop this public lynching of any word and other African Americans.
Wait a minute, council member. So you've got a chairman here. You got to play by the rules of this committee.
I apologize. But
okay. So. Any other discussion on this matter?
I have a question. Because we've got so many things kind of happening right now, and I know that the mayor sent the letter to the comptroller.
Right.
And I wanted to just kind of ask about the status of that, so that as we think about what the next steps are, to make sure we aren't duplicating efforts or stepping on.
Chairman, can I address that for you?
Okay.
Well, first I'm going to say, in response to the additional building issues, the allegations were, was there not enough support there? And we tested, and there was lots of support. HHHM, a third party from Chattanooga, reviewed and said the support was there, and that the entities, the individuals building, were qualified for the rate that they were being billed for. And I will say that the controller's office received that report, the request. They came to me and said, we looked at your report. We don't know what else we would do at this point in time. How do we, to say it was 10 hours or 12 hours or 8 hours a day was justified or not. And from that perspective, but then they came back to me and said, well, Mark, can you follow up on our behalf? And that's when I went out to check with Michelle, because I thought Michelle was instituting, but it was actually the Chief Compliance Officer. But the Finance Department's Office of Financial Accountability is going through all the invoices, all the open paid invoices, and plan to go back 3 months to schedule all those out.
I just want to make sure the audit committee knows what we are doing and what we're not doing. Well, the mayor asked me to hold payments for 30 days. So what we have done is we have downloaded all invoices that are in our queue to be paid, and we are evaluating those for just to make sure that they're valid expenses before we issue payment to Collier. So that is the scope of what we're doing, is addressing that piece of it. And then after we're done with that, we may have to do some additional work for the chief compliance officer, but we don't know yet. But that's the first thing that we were asked to do. That's all, just to,
Open ones, my understanding.
right, just kind of looking at open invoices so that we did our due diligence before those payments were issued. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We've got staff looking at that. So, back to your motion, which was?
Well, I guess to follow up on that, so the comptroller is looking at something, the mayor's office, position as director of compliance, is that what it's called?
Chief compliance
Chief
officer.
compliance officer is conducting a review of matters related to this.
Yes.
And we've got this report. Certainly, I feel like what the chief compliance officer from the mayor's office is doing and the work of the audit committee should be on the same page. And I mean, I'll go ahead and say that after we get done talking about the MNPS one, I'm going to suggest that we have another meeting sooner than what we have scheduled, because I think the public, frankly, can't wait 2 months for us to have our next scheduled meeting to take whatever the next step is. And I guess I would want to pass my motion to not accept this report at this time and plan on inviting the chief compliance officer to come talk to us when we meet next, hopefully sooner than a couple months from now, to make sure that what she's looking at and what's happening with this report are dovetailed.
Is that part of your motion?
Well,
Revised motion.
I'll go ahead and, I know for...
It's more of a coordination, what I'm trying to get
Right,
at.
that's all we're trying to do.
If I was going to revise the motion, I would say the motion would be to not accept this report at this time, to part two, schedule a special meeting sooner than whatever we've got scheduled, and number three, to invite the chief compliance officer to come talk to us about these Collier allegations when we have that specially called meeting.
Is there a second to that? Okay.
I'd like to say just one thing, too, and that is the only allegation that was substantiated was the one that said it had an appearance of preferential treatment. Rather than saying there was outright preferential treatment, it said it had an appearance of it. And I do want to say that in the field of auditing and financial reporting, where auditors have to be independent, certainly the appearance of a lack of objectivity or the appearance of a lack of independence is really as critical as, being totally not independent. In other words, that's a very serious violation as well. And, if it appears, we may be delaying the acceptance of this, that may be something to look at is in the other areas, the word appearance does not show up, but, should that be looked at as well?
Okay. Any further discussion? Do you want to restate?
There's three parts to the motion: not accept the revised investigation report about Collier Engineering today, to set a specially called meeting as soon as we can all arrange to be together, and three, to invite the chief compliance officer to come talk to us when we have that specially called meeting.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next order of business.
Next one is the investigation.
How many did our district councilmen rely to use Mr. Word? You know how many neighborhood association meetings he goes to? And then when you insinuate that, and that's,
Point of order.
Yeah,
they've already ruled.
right, but again, council member, this is an audit committee meeting. It is run by subject to the chair. If we need to have a discussion later, then we can do that. But you have to follow the rule of the chair here.
Stated
The
agenda
next, the
item.
next agenda item is the investigation report of the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools procurement matters. There were 15 various allegations that were received, none of them very specific. They were kind of generalities of impropriety related to mainly through purchasing with a variety of vendors and some individual allegations related to individuals on the staff of the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. You received the report. If you have questions, we'll entertain those. It's very volume. It looks volume, but we put all the policies in the back because the policies were hard to find for people at the time in place.
So, observation and then a motion. Like the last one, well, first of all, this is dated February 7th, so that was last Thursday, and frankly, of the 69-page report, I have not got all the way through it in the amount of detail that I'd like, so I'm going to end up moving that we not accept this one today and discuss it further at the specially called meeting that we just agreed we were going to have. But just quickly, I'm going to talk about allegation F, G, and H, which are three that I did get through. And again, this is I don't understand, the facts appear to equal substantiation, and then the opposite result is reached. For example, in F, the allegation is that it's a no-bid contract awarded that failed to comply with MNPS's procurement procedures. And then if you read I'm looking at page 12 of the report. If you look at the discussion and analysis, it says MNPS considered the company contract an emergency contract due to teacher vacancies and awarded it as an emergency contract. However, there was no form to document how the decision was made. MNPS Schools Policy FM 2.111 requires a written determination of the basis of the emergency for the selection of the vendor. The purchasing director has since implemented a form to document emergency contracts. So it appears that what's clear from the discussion and analysis is that it was an emergency basis. There was a step to take in order to issue on an emergency basis. That step was not taken. It was fixed subsequently, and then the conclusion on the next page is unsubstantiated. And it seems like the facts lay out that it absolutely happened and got fixed after the fact. Similarly, in G, the allegation is a no-bid sole source contract awarded that didn't comply with MNPS school procurement policy. This is on page 14 of the report. Again, the discussion and the analysis lays out federal regulations allow sole source purchases, but the process of the selection of the specific product should be documented. CFR 200.320F4 states, quote, after solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined inadequate, end of quote. And then the next paragraph goes on to explain that that didn't happen. And then the conclusion is unsubstantiated, which seems like a non sequitur to me. And then H is the last example I'll go through. H seems to, and this is page 15 and 16 of the report, in the facts section, and then the discussion and analysis and conclusion, it seems to fairly carefully in the facts section go through showing that there was compensation received by an employee, that the conflict of interest form for the year that was supposed to show the compensation did not, and then after the investigation began, the forms were corrected to reflect the compensation, and inexplicably to me, the conclusion is unsubstantiated. This is another one where it seems like the facts very clearly lay out that it absolutely happened and was corrected only because of an audit investigation. Again, I haven't been through the full 69 pages. These three are reminiscent of what has struck me as not quite right about the Collier one and at least one other previous investigation. And given the fact that this came out a couple business days ago, and at least I haven't got through it all, and we're going to have a specially called meeting, that's the reason why I would move that we not accept this report today.
Is there a second?
And then
Does not accept today or just not accept? I mean,
Just not accept
okay,
today.
coordinated.
today,
I'm not accept today, and because I haven't been through the whole thing, I don't want to prejudge how I'm going to feel about the whole thing. I have serious systemic concerns about how laying out a bunch of facts that appear to indicate a violation of policy that only gets corrected after being identified by internal audit equals unsubstantiated. But I don't want to prejudge the whole thing before I've read it, so the motion is just to not accept it today.
Okay,
Defer,
discussion.
essentially.
Yeah.
You got a second? Second.
Second, council.
second, third.
Any other discussion on this? All in favor of not accepting today? Okay. This next order of business, I have a conflict, so I'm going to recuse myself. Vice Chairman.
On the next order of business, a discussion, should have a discussion on requests received, council member Virtue, for an audit of certain architecture and engineering firms which conduct significant levels of business with the Metropolitan Nashville government. So we have a request to take a look at other architectural engineering firms and kind of examine policies, perhaps of billing and related activities. So I guess we need a discussion of this particular recommendation.
What struck me on this one is that there are just select firms here, and there are many other firms that provide these services. And I think that if we are to approve this, that we need to expand the scope and maybe come up with some agreed upon procedures as to exactly what we think the coverage of the review should cover. Because this could really be, and thirdly, I think this should probably be done through our consultant resources.
So that's similar, Mr. Vice Chair, to what I was thinking. I didn't know whether the list was complete or not complete, but it struck me that a more general compliance audit of some point that Public Works is the interest as opposed to the firms necessarily. And I definitely feel like we should take advantage of third-party assets that we've got, but I don't think I know enough to define the scope today.
The only word that we have here in the request is the word audit, which, as you mentioned, that when you get away from financial information for an audit, kind of begins to be a little cloudy. And just like the report that Collier received from their particular accounting firm, it was a consultation agreement as requested by their attorney, and it sort of resembled agreed upon procedures, which is what we're saying is we would need to take a look at exactly what we would want the objective to be and what procedures to be used.
I agree.
Well, and the finance director would allow me. So what you're saying is, in effect, get a more comprehensive list of people doing business with Public Works of such and such an amount.
I think her request was for architectural and engineering firms. If I'm reading the letter, it wasn't necessarily firms doing work with Public Works. So that's how I read the letter. So I think it's beyond just a single department.
It's all A&E firms doing business with the city of a
That's how I
certain
read the
amount.
request. That's why I have a need to really think about how we can define that scope and what that looks like.
I guess I'm wondering whether it would make sense for the committee to designate a member, like maybe our finance director, to work with Mr. Swan between now and our specially called meeting to propose either scope
Okay.
or
And the
some
procedure.
possibilities
Right.
for scope.
Right.
And I suggest finance director because of the close knowledge of,
Right.
I'm glad to do that.
I don't mean to volunteer you.
No, but it's appropriate. I mean, because I think we could add value there.
And one of the values is this a particular type of contract?
Her request is specific to architectural engineering firms.
But under that, there's a particular indefinite delivery nature of the contract that
Not
is
all
a
of-
particular trigger?
Not all of those are IDIQ contracts.
Not all, but it would include IDIQ
Yes.
contracts, okay.
Yeah, so
Can't believe you guys just made
If I
me
can
learn
just-
IDIQ.
indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity.
Which would appear to be fertile ground for any sort of sustained
Yeah.
monitoring process.
So can I make a motion then that between now and when we have the specially called meeting, that the finance director work with Mr. Swan to review Council Lady Verger's January 30th letter and propose potential scope of services
And
for us to
agreed upon
discuss?
procedures.
Agreed upon procedures.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next order of business. Memorandum of understanding.
Last time, the school board had talked about having two dedicated auditors dedicated to doing work for assurance services for the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools for the Board of Education. They would like that to be housed out of the Office of Internal Audit. And so we drafted an MOU together. The Budget and Finance Committee of the schools is reviewing it today. So I just wanted to present that is here. If you shall have any feedback on it, let us know. It's still tentative. It may not get approved. It requires budget money to go along with it.
So their proposal is to actually give you money
Give me
so
money,
that these
about
would be your
$250,000.
employees.
They'd be my employees, and they'd have to give us notice, and if they want to discontinue it
You'd
adequately.
supervise them and
We would
everything.
supervise, and that their request would go through, the kicker on this is that the audit committee has to approve all audit work, and so their request would be bubbled up and brought, any request they have brought forward to this committee.
When do you think this would start?
There were potential to be the next coming fiscal year, the 2020
We would treat these audits like we would any other
audit. Yes,
part
sir.
of the audit plan
Yes, sir.
approved.
And then special requests as they come along. There's a little bit of percentage of time in the MOU to do advisory services at their request. I think we said up to 5% time for advisory services.
I think it was maybe 10.
So
So is this the cost of two permanent auditors to be added to the internal audit?
right, I don't remember if we put the cost in there, but about
The
200.
cost is listed $115,000 approximately
Yeah, 115 per person,
per person.
per staff.
So they would be permanent additions
To my staff.
to your staff.
Housed at Metro
They'd
Nashville
be
Public Schools.
devoted
To
100% to school.
They believe they can have enough work
Internal
that they need assurance services that could stay
So
full-time and wanted to be independent.
who would be your contact at
That hasn't-
MNPS? Who would be your,
We don't have that all worked out yet. Probably Mark North, since he's the government liaison.
Would they have any role in reviewing your audit findings before they come to this committee?
Those are things we'd have to iron out through.
Yeah, I guess I would have thought that it would have been an audit committee of the board, not a management person.
Well, we haven't worked that out. For one, it's still a potential. That's all it is. So once it becomes more firm, we'll work out some of the more details.
They've got an internal audit shop.
They have an internal audit group that pretty much devoted 100% to doing activity funds for the schools. For all the, they have 120 activity funds that they kind of do a two-one. They go out and train the volunteers on good controls and procedures on activity funds, and then they come back and audit the people they train. But they pretty much stay 100% dedicated to that work. And they report to the finance department of the school.
Mr. Chair, just the only, subject to getting all the rest of the details, of course, but the one thing I wanted to ask today is whether you feel like your office has adequate supervisory resources to handle the 2 extra employees and the extra work.
Well, that's what we're, potentially, yes. Until we try, so I'm saying we hadn't quite figured out how it's going to be implemented, so that may be coming back.
Well, in addition to all the other questions that you're still working on, that one's on my mind. And I know this year this fiscal year, when some investigation reports have bubbled up, I know there's been an outsourcing of at least one audit that you might have otherwise done internally. It just makes me want to make sure that there's adequate resources to supervise the people.
Okay, so no experiment. I mean, I have an obligation, a requirement under government auditing standards to make sure there's adequate supervision. So
what percentage of MNPS work has audit been doing the last couple of years, just in rough percentage?
Well, that's why in your workbook, you'll see we have the audit plan
right.
later on in the agenda. I'm going to take it to a page.
But it's been far more than 2 full-time people anyway from your office on average.
I'm going to say what page. I'll try to give you a page to kind of show the... Okay, on page 63, we try to, the very top of there is listed. Those are the audits that the Office of Internal Audit has done in the last 10 years. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 audits. So basically one a year. One being the big giant council mandated or requested performance audit of the entire school system in 2015. So they do represent over $1 billion of the appropriated budget, and they're not being neglected. I mean, a lot of times here there's never been any audits. There have been audits done all along.
But you may
be more.
Bring in more than these 2 people on other MMPS audits as well. It's not going to be limited to just these 2.
Exactly. We can always add supplement that. And then the question is, do you keep the same people there all the time, or you rotate different people so you have different fresh eyes looking at it?
So they are paying for an additional capacity for your overall.
In exchange for that, they want it to be dedicated to their assurance, their entity.
And the 2 people was their suggestion for what they were willing to pay for?
That's what they felt like they could afford.
Okay.
And who has to, I see the signature lines, but has the Board of Education voted on this?
Not at this point. They're looking at it tonight in their agenda.
Okay, so they would have to, they would have to approve proceeding ahead with this.
I would say yes. Yeah,
and then
they don't
who
want
would
to
approve it? This committee would have to approve the agreement?
That's where he has it right now, but I would think if the committee approves the audit plan, it's that's what we do anyway.
That's your primary duty under the charter and the code, is to approve the audit plan. And because this arrangement sort of implicates that there will be additional audits that will be a part of that audit plan that you have authority to approve, I think that would be why you would be involved.
But then, because it's two positions, they're going to have to do something with their budget, right?
Yes.
And then it would have to come over to, it would have to come through the mayor's office and then through the council to, no, it would be something in their budget that we would at least know about.
I think the idea is next fiscal year.
Okay.
And like, we've been auditing the schools all along, and if they don't approve it, we'll still audit them. And if you believe that, the risk is greater there, and that's where all our resources should go, we can send all 10 auditors there for the next 5 years as part of the process.
But they would be working under this committee's audit plan?
Correct.
And under audit standards.
No, this committee's audit standards.
Any other input? Although this is a work in progress.
It's really just a discussion item at this point. Just kind of let you know what's going on, and we have to try to draft something. If you see something in language or some good points here that we'll try to address before we finalize. Next one. Okay, the next one is the audit of the General Sessions Traffic Court. And we have Kraft CPA. We outsourced this audit to Kraft. And TJ, who was the lead on the audit, Judge Blackburn is here, and Warner Haswell is here to answer questions. And we'll let CJ give a brief summary. Go from there.
Good afternoon. My name is CJ Higgins. I'm with Kraft CPAs. We assisted Metro Internal Audit in performing the audit for the General Sessions Court Traffic School. This audit was done in response to a fraud that occurred in which an employee stole over $100,000 was charged last year. Audit objectives included assessing 4 key areas, and that's controls around cash, which includes the revenue collection process, expense and physical security of cash, controls around the traffic school fee waivers, segregation of duties for the revenue collection of function, and compliance with laws and regulations. And we gave the overall area a grade of unsatisfactory due to a combination of major and minor deviations from best practices, which could result in loss of assets. In the interest of time, I'm going to go over the 2 high-risk findings that we identified during this audit. The first one is around fee waiver management, and this is the area where the fraud actually occurred because reliable fee waiver information was not being created and maintained. In this instance, the only copy of the fee waiver form being generated was physically given to the customer and not documented in any other way. In addition to this, there was no formalized process in place for waiving the $20 rescheduling fee, which is automatically applied by the class enrollment system when a customer requests to reschedule their class. In response to this, management has decided to transfer the revenue collection processes to the circuit court clerk and has already put a process in place to ensure authenticity of the fee waiver forms. The second high-risk finding is around physical security of cash. Cashier drawers remained unlocked when cashiers were away from their stations, and the safe, which contains cash after hours, remains unlocked, although that was kept behind a door. An excessive number of employees had access to that door. And as a response to this, management has already taken steps to ensure that the drawers remain locked and the safe is secured until the transition of this function occurs to the circuit court clerk. Those are our 2 high-risk findings. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have about any other findings in this report.
We'll go here first.
No. It looked like from the management plan, the response, that the courts were pretty cooperative in getting these taken care of and addressed. What was your experience with that?
It was good. We worked with Warner a lot, and he put us in contact with people that we needed to speak with. And we actually had to delay some of our procedures and ended up completing all those by the end of the audit. So they were very participative.
I do appreciate Judge Blackburn, Warner, Mr. Hassel. It does seem like, I know you guys asked for this audit, and it seems like almost everything's taken care of. Appreciate that.
I agree. If you didn't mind, how was this individual caught? Was it by accident or?
I believe another employee reported it.
That is correct. An employee, if I may answer, an employee realized that there was a diminution in receipts from the traffic school. And she set about on her own time trying to figure out why the receipts had decreased and had no clue what the basis for that decrease was. And then determined that in fact it was an employee theft. She had no idea why the decrease was. And once she realized it was employee theft, she brought it to Warner's attention, who then brought it to my attention, who brought it to Metro PD. And because the traffic school is funded through federal funds, the FBI.
Would we do anything to encourage this kind of wonderful behavior by
I'll let Warner
Metro
respond to
Police?
that.
Okay, or just generally in the government? I mean, it's useful.
I think from a middle management standpoint of the person in charge of the school at the time, didn't see some red flags that CJ brought to our attention. This employee he was the chief cashier. He was given an opportunity to become a trained, certified National Safety Council instructor so he could get away from the cash duties. He, graciously turned down that invitation, and for obvious reasons. And so that was an internal flaw that has since been corrected, but it went on for several years before it was detected. But the employee, as Judge Blackburn referred to, spent a considerable amount of hours testifying before the grand jury. We provided all kinds of information to local law enforcement and federal law enforcement.
Councilman, what's your question about people stepping forward and
how we encourage whistle.
We have not, and I'm disappointed in that. This particular employee has done two subsequent things that are courageous and financially very responsible for the city, and she has not received any reward in any shape, form, or fashion for her service. And I'm very disappointed by the response from others to her service.
Well, I mean, I agree. Is it because we just don't have a program to do that? We don't have a whistleblower thank you program? I'm looking at Talia here. More than a lunch, right? More than a pat on the back? Or?
I don't know, Councilman. I will say some of my colleagues have, in fact, responded very negatively to her unbelievable service to the city.
Okay.
And I have been astounded at their negative response.
Well, it seems maybe it's a subject for audit, for our chief auditor to think about in the future, that recognition or conceivably financial encouragement being awarded by a completely neutral party would be something to be considered.
Particularly when an employee steps forward and recognizes theft, whether it's an employee or whatever the source is, and saves the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that is amazing for someone to realize that something like that's occurring and to have the forethought to realize and put that together. I'm not sure I could do that. I mean, Talia, I'm sure you could because you have that mathematical mind, but I'm not sure I could.
Yeah.
Isn't
That's
this more
brave
of
of her,
like
though.
policies and procedures?
Yeah.
Like, how the administration or council would want to
Yeah, I think
run a budgetary thing?
Trying to figure out more about it. So how long did it go on?
It went on for at least 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years.
We changed accounting systems, I believe, and we couldn't go back further than that.
Right.
All right, so it could have gone back longer, and if it sounds like if this individual hadn't figured it out or just taking it upon herself or himself to do it, it still might be going on?
Oh, it absolutely would be still going on.
Okay.
And the egregious nature of what was occurring was shocking.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder, I don't know if this is for you or for you. I mean, where were the internal control reviews happening?
So there was a reconciliation done every day. There's a reconciliation done every day to pretty much tie out cash checks and fee waivers received.
Yeah.
The reconciliation was tying out. This person was forging the documents.
Okay.
The individual was forging judge signatures on fee waivers every day.
And it wasn't fully discovered until, as a result, when it was found and we reported to law enforcement, did they put the cameras, the secret cameras in there. And you could see
They did a week-long sting.
a week-long sting, and you could see, I mean, he had the modern-day whiteout, which we don't allow that for anybody handling forms. He brought it from home.
He was putting money in his sock.
Now, obviously, there could be lessons learned for,
Right.
checks and balances.
Was the same person who had custody of cash also doing a reconciliation?
No,
Thank goodness.
So they were different people.
different.
It gives us all pause. But that is being corrected by the separation of all funds being now, beginning April 1st, being handled by Mr. Rooker's office, who handled all the funds for the civil side, where all the fees and fines are paid already, or if you have or help me.
Yeah, are you talking about on the criminal side?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the criminal side, a misdemeanor citation, where a driver's license related offense, you could be sent to the appropriate school for a driver's license reinstatement. And,
Or if you're a court cost, you go there as well. So it's all going to be in one place.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
Next on the agenda is the follow-up of the ITS radio communications audit report. This is the second follow-up. It's a confidential CGIS report since it's 800 megahertz radio. And everything's been implemented except for two items. And I would say one's probably important, the other one's more of an administrative issue, taken care, and it was because of the government shutdown. It was delayed at the time to take care of some stuff with the FCC, and so it could not. They were hoping to have it finished by the time we did finalized our review, but it didn't happen because of the government shutdown.
Now, we have an audit member that's
Yes.
criteria. I mean, you have credentials.
Yeah, I've got whatever clearance.
Yeah, CGIS clearance.
And have seen the full unredacted report, and I think, like he said, there's 18 of 20 findings that are taken care of, and it seems like all is in order.
So while we don't have it here, just
Yeah.
we have eyes on them.
And I was trying to remember
He's legal. He can look at it.
You got clearance.
And just a reminder, the total report had 41 recommendations, and so basically we're talking, I believe all of them were implemented except for this 39, so.
Well, let's Bob ask a question, I think.
Okay. The next audit on the agenda was the audit of the Parks and Recreation and Wave Country, and we have Seth Hatfield here to do a brief on that audit.
So if you turn to page 37 through 39, that's Wave Country. We have John Holmes with us tonight. He's the superintendent over revenue producing property for the Parks and Recreation Department. Basically, we had three objectives. When you think about a public pool, when we do our risk assessment, the worst thing you think of is someone, patron getting hurt or drowning. So obviously, our first objective was that controls are in place to ensure the safety and security of patrons. We ensured all lifeguards are trained and certified. We performed an observation to ensure, pools and slides had adequate coverage and guards were attentive. We made sure that permits were in place, and we reviewed the surprise inspection documentation by the Public Health Department. Our second objective was just to look at controls over fiscal resources. So back in 2014, an audit was done at the Centennial Sportsplex, and so it seems like they had really tightened up their controls during that audit, or after that audit, and that kind of leaked over to the Wave Country. So they had really good controls in place. They had segregation of duties, two-person integrity over deposit preparation. They're doing surprise cash counts. The only thing we found there is that voids and refunds could be done by employees, and then there was a $2 coupon that several people used, and those weren't being reconciled at the end of the day. So that's a cash skimming opportunity there. So we had two recommendations to lock down voids and refunds and just start reconciling that $2 coupon. And then lastly, we did a survey of patrons. We asked them to rate whether they felt the staff was courteous and knowledgeable, the facilities were well maintained and clean, whether they felt their safety was a priority, and then their overall satisfaction. And the survey results were very favorable. They strongly agreed with all those statements. So overall, we had 3 recommendations, and they were all accepted. Any questions?
Questions? Okay, I think Park should feel good about this, and it's marvelous, and
There's a great staff out there.
move to accept.
Did you actually get into the pool?
I didn't. I went on a weekend, but I didn't get in.
Next one is discussion of the follow-up on the short-term rental permitting process that was issued January 4th. And that audit, there was out of 12 audit recommendations, 6 of them have been implemented and 4 are still open. And the 4 that are still open related to verifying short-term rental taxes. They've been ensuring the taxes have been paid before they renew a permit. And then management review of the. We're recommending that there's lots of requirements to make sure everything happens, and so we've asked that management should have some kind of supervisory review to review not everything, but on a sample basis to make sure that it's being done the way it's supposed to be done. And then in addition to that, we said it would be good on CityWorks to have a place to document that management review, so you could go back and know which ones have been done and know kind of what kind of coverage you had. And so that one hasn't been implemented yet, and the CityWorks, they're saying there's still some time to get CityWorks modified to add that field to it. And then the last one was having written procedures over their permitting process. So we will continue to follow up.
Are these, so there is progress on them? They're not just at a standstill, not being done?
Bill asked that question.
Yeah, they're making, particularly on things like documentation, retaining the documentation. Now, there are some things where, one of the biggest risks in this process is the fact it's owner-occupied. Verifying owner-occupied is one of the most difficult to verify. That one, they're still trying to find ways to mitigate that risk. They're still going through basically collecting driver's license, bank statements, that sort of thing. We were hoping host compliance would be able to address some of that, and they've done a wonderful job in terms of sniffing out people who are operating a short-term rental without a permit. But it's
but I think most of my colleagues would agree. I think there's a sense that since law got passed a year ago and host compliance has been in place, that there's a dramatic improvement in terms of fewer complaints. And so the proof's in the pudding that there's fewer community complaints, which is good. I would like whatever kind of follow-up needs to happen to see that they keep plugging away on the open items would be useful for the city.
I think you raised a good point, and that is, this is one area where complaints is really a control mechanism. And even though they can't fix it, they can complain about it. And certainly the city has a good process of maintaining records of complaints, you can always compare volume, just as you were saying. If we're getting a significant decrease, I mean, that certainly is good, but it could always jump, or maybe there's more in the spring and summer than there would be in the winter. I don't know, but we just need to keep a close eye on that, I think.
it meshes with common sense. Once the city was able to engage in any enforcement whatsoever with host compliance, there's some number of, my anecdotal opinion is there were some number of scofflaws that decided it wasn't worth it anymore if there was going to be some enforcement. Yeah. And then there's the actual catching of people who are breaking the law. And so, again, my feeling is the complaints are way down, and so we should keep at it, try to keep doing better.
Okay. The next item is the audit of the Registry of Deeds, and Nan Nguyen is here to do a debrief on that. Ms. Johnson was unable to be here. She had a previous commitment, and so we figured we'd go ahead and do the debrief. If there's any questions that Nan can't answer for you, then we'll defer. And Ms. Johnson had stated she'd be glad to attend at the next meeting.
This audit was requested by the management. Basically, the objective of the audit is to make sure that the Register of Deeds has controls in place to ensure sound financial operation. So we've looked into the process of the revenue collection cycle. That's the major part. Tested a sample of the bank deposit and reconciled the state taxes filing numbers with the revenue figure. We also reviewed the payroll and leave time process and recalculated a sample of payroll records and also verified a sample of leave balance. And in addition, we've reviewed the travel and credit card policy and practice and also made recommendations. So we've also followed up with the implementation status of the prior audit of Register of Deeds, which completed in April 2012. So our conclusion is there are necessary controls in place to make the process work. However, management needs to improve access control over their information system and also reevaluate the travel and credit card policy to ensure the public purpose for all the expenses and also retain documentation for appropriate time period. Questions?
My question is about the findings F1 and F2 in the management response, where the office rejects the recommendation. I guess two comments. One, I'm not sure I understand the basis of the rejection, and it seems like something like it's binary. Somebody's right, somebody's wrong about whether state law would prohibit implementation. And I guess my feeling is, follow-up item on this is I kind of want to know what the answer to that binary question is.
Well, it'd be good to have that Ms. Johnson here, but our intention was that this is a net fee elected official, which means that you don't appropriate their money. That they do get an appropriation for some of the Bridgestone Arena rental and some other miscellaneous costs, but their payroll and everything else is paid out of their fees that they collect, and they run their own payroll, their own accounting. Now, they've outsourced their payroll to a third party now. We believe that they could be more transparent by doing MOUs with the Metro Finance and using Metro systems and using Metro payroll and Metro financial accounting system to get more transparency and use Metro's banking accounts relationships. And so this is where they do have the right, but by state law, this constitutional office has the right to not, I believe that constitutional office should say that, has the right to not do any of those things. They can be a net fee and run their own show. And so, but they could voluntarily either opt to, my understanding is they could voluntarily opt to be an appropriated entity, or they could opt to make arrangements to leverage our existing systems. It used to be they did their own payroll. At least now they've gone to a third party to do their payroll. We really felt them doing their own payroll was not the wisest thing when we were there prior time. Because there's too many payroll laws that can go wrong if you're sitting there having one person doing your payroll.
One being, they do have their accounting outside of Metro's system, but they could easily come join the fold. if they chose to do so and not have a separate payroll
And that was
system.
the recommendation saying, come join us.
But elected officials do have a great deal of discretion. And in terms of the budget piece and how that's budgeted, this is a question that we get almost every year during the budget season. I think you've asked me that question before about register of deeds and circuit court clerk, because the budget looks as if there are no salary dollars listed. You just see some below the line expenses. And so you don't see the full picture of their budgeted expenses based on this, how this budget is being presented today. There was a point in time for at least 1 or 2 years that we did show the total appropriation. So it has happened before, but it reverted back. Terry, do you remember that?
Are there detailed information broken out by that department in the audit?
And the CAFR?
Yeah.
They will go out, the auditors go out and they review their books.
What they will have in there is we have a trust, the fiduciary fund, and they show the balance, beginning balance to ending balance, all the additions and all the deletions. So everything they collected and everything they sent to the state shows up. And then you assume what's left over is what they use to pay.
So there's a dance that you do. You've got to look at everything.
And I would tell you one is because it took us a while to find out what the exact balance of their computer fund, and they have a $1.9 million sitting in their computer fund, and they don't do like a monthly statement. You can't just go and say, here's a financial statement for the computer fund.
That should be in here.
So just from a process point of view, my feeling is that if the answer from management is, well, we don't want to, then that's what it should say. But if there's going to be a leaning on pursuant to a state statute, we can't, then I feel like I would want to have some letter writing or something to indicate that, okay, at the end of the day, everybody actually agrees there's no state law that prohibits these implementation. It's a choice. And I agree with the idea that that position exists under the state constitution. If that office doesn't want to, so be it. But I would, just from a process point of view, would rather than just say, well, we don't want to.
The reason we put it in the report because since there was a transition, we thought there might be an opportunity for someone to say, hey, I want to do things differently.
Do we know what the state statute is?
I don't.
So we ought to find out what it is.
With the states, yeah, because it says pursuant to state
And then I
statute.
think my other question would be, is there anybody else, any other entities that fall under this?
The only other one that has the fee account for which we do this netting on the budget is the circuit court clerk.
Okay, and so are you saying that they fall, Register of Deeds falls under, do they fall under HR in some way? Or do they control?
No, they are a total different department.
They are like a whole separate being, and they control whatever they.
They were created by some state statute.
813.
So who determines the distribution to Metro Nashville?
Basically, they collect, I'm just going to simplify it, Mark can do it. If they collect $10 and their expenses are $3, then they are supposed to turn the net difference over to Metro as revenue.
And they're allowed to keep a certain few months of working fund in their account.
Right. And then this computer fund that he mentions, there is a state statute that sets aside a particular piece of their revenue for computer systems, and it gets deposited into a separate fund for their use.
So you're just informed what they're going to be sending?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the auditors go out there and validate the numbers.
Goes out and does it.
There's a typo on page 45, and I feel sure that it's not $101 million being collected. It would have been $11,472 in taxes and fees.
In the background section?
Yeah, in the background section.
I don't know. That's for 2 years.
2 years. You wouldn't. I mean,
This is not, in taxes and fees, that's the state's money. The state gets a ton of money from this.
Okay, so it is $101 million, of which we're only showing in that same period about $11 million worth of funding to Metro. So you're saying the bulk of that money?
The bulk of their money, they're basically almost 100% collecting money for the state.
For the state.
And then, but we do it, and the state gives us a fee for collecting that money. And then whatever we don't use the expenses not used to collect that money goes to the Metro General Fund.
Very clarifying, thank you.
I mean, I'd like to commend her for requesting the audit, when she came in, and asking for you all to take a review. That's good.
Any other questions?
Mark, let me ask one question. I don't know whether this is an example of it or not, but, virtually all the financial numbers that we put in these reports are revenues and expenses or expenditures. They're not necessarily assets or liabilities. You don't show bank account balances. And I just wonder, like this, for example, are there occasionally these reports that we prepare, would it be helpful if you had a comparison last year, this year of their bank account balance, just so we know not only what they spent and what they...
Well, on Exhibit A on your page 46,
I see it.
fund balance, the last line.
I see fund balance.
That's going to be their bank account balance.
I thought maybe they had some assets other than cash.
No, it's just going to be cash. And then the same thing, that's why we tried to break out, because earlier, how their accounting system is all kind of grouped together, and we tried to break the computer fund out separately so you could see.
So there's not a due to or due from. They don't have any liabilities, receivables. It's all cash.
It's pretty much all cash.
Okay. All right.
Or it's what they owe to the state at the end of the cutoff period.
Okay, are we getting ready to leave now?
I'm going to have to leave, and I would love it if we could are we going to try to figure out the date when we're going to meet, or are we just going to ask Mr. Swan to coordinate that afterwards? Not.
Since we're getting ready to lose some folks,
Are there any action items?
any action items, anything else?
The audit plan.
The audit plan is still a work in progress, right?
It's here in front of you.
And that would be for the calendar year, or
our audit plan goes from February 1st to January 31st.
And it doesn't.
It doesn't have to be today, but we can keep working on the old audit plan.
The proposed one doesn't include anything for if an M&PS MOU comes together?
Right now, no. We'd have additional resources. We'd be able to include more. What it does include is taking Council Lady Bircher's letter and saying all those firms and list every one of those as a separate audit, and to also do an audit. And one of the requests was to do basically an overview performance audit of paving, construction horizontal, another one for sidewalk horizontal construction, and then another one looking at the overall vertical construction process for general services.
Is there anything you need for approval, like in the next 30 or 60 days, since this is more of a work in progress? Like a line item?
Well, we've still got the audits that we have carried forward, and there's a couple items I had taken off, but I have people I can keep working on the previous page. You just want to say defer till the next meeting, that's fine.
As a work in progress, on other potential audit engagements, submit for the committee's consideration the new sheriff's facility to do an audit just exactly as the audit.
That's on the plan right now. That's number 13 on the plan.
Oh, that's already over there. Sorry, I was looking at the other page.
Okay. The performance report to council. Action item on that.
Yes, they're on page 78. Dated today. Is there any comments? 79?
This is just the facts, right? Okay.
It looks
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Move for acceptance.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. So the rest of the agenda will push for the next meeting, and the next meeting, just want to try to coordinate something. How far out? I know you said sooner versus later, but it probably needs to be beyond a certain date. so that work can be done.
I would think.
You're marking on each month.
At least 2 weeks, it seems like it.
We typically meet the second Tuesday of the month, so usually the second, that would be the March 12th or 13th or something like that.
It's just showing our next meeting's not till April.
Yeah.
We're having a request to have one
In March instead.
in March, so.
I'm open on March 12th at 4 o'clock.
Just want to shoot for the second Tuesday.
March 12th, 4 o'clock's good.
I'll make it work.
Let's just all make it work.
All right.
Okay, is there a need to go into executive session?
I have no item for that, so.
So any further business? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.